Hi friends, it's Becky and I want to share a design using the Ocean Vault Potomac Beads Treasure Edition box. There are some beautiful blues and greens and all of these delicious Czech glass beads that came in that subscription. And so I'm going to be making a beaded chain necklace for y'all. We're going to be using some wrapped loop links, and I'll show you how to make those wrapped loops in just a little bit. The beads that I'm using are these fantastic Aqua AB butterflies. These are Czech glass beads. Some 10mm fire polish beads. Some 6mm pearls. These are the Potomac pearls. And some dagger beads, because we are going to do a really fun thing with these dagger beads to embellish one of the wrapped loop links on this design. I'm also going to be making a little focal with those same beads using some wire. I've got some 8/0 silver lined aqua seed beads that are going to be helping embellish them, and then we're also going to have some earrings that go with it. I'm going to definitely demonstrate this. If you want to jump ahead to any of the things that we do, I'll put links to the different sections below. The first thing we're going to do is make links. The second thing we're going to do is make our embellish link. Then I'm going to link all of those together to make a strand that will go on one side of the necklace. After that, we'll make our focal, and then we'll combine both strands that I've made to the focal and add a closure. Speaking of closure, it's just going to be a lobster clasp closure. And then I've got some jump rings. These are 5mm jump rings, and I'm going to be using them to link together my wrapped loop links. And for the earrings, it's basically going to be the same beads, but we're going to do some fun things with some wire when we do that. The wire that I'm using is 22 gauge wire. This is in a pewter color. I think it is a fantastic color match for like stainless steel color, and that I thought that was a good color to go for with these beads. The tools that I'm using are flush cutters, chain nose pliers, and round nose pliers. So we've got those. You'll also want a second set of pliers or a jump ring open and close tool if you're going to be connecting that with jump rings. I do have a second set of pliers here that I'll grab when it's time for that. All right, so let's talk about our links. So I've got basically these 3 different links that I've made. Both of these are just the Czech glass link with a wrapped loop on either side. I'm going to demonstrate that with this one. And then this one, I've got the pearl and 2 seed beads on it and wrapped loops on either side, and I'll demonstrate that one. And then the next link that I'll do is going to be our fancy extra embellished one, so with the daggers on it. So let's get these guys a little bit out of the way and get to making some wrapped loop links. All right, now when I do wrapped loop links, I do like to put my beads onto the wire first and work off of the spool. That way I can better gauge how much wire I need for my second loop without having to estimate the first wrap plus the second wrap plus the length of the beads. I could just go ahead and get started. Now I'm going to take my round nose pliers, and I've got about 1.5 to 2 inches down from the end of this wire. I'm just going to bend it back like that a little bit, and while I'm holding onto it, I'm going to use my finger to push that wire up over the top of my round nose pliers, open the jaw, swing it around, and then keep going around with that wire. Give that a little twist to help continue it all the way. And now I've got a little circle, and it's like a scarf going around the neck. I'm going to hold on to my loop here, and you can use either your finger or a second set of pliers to push the wire around the neck of the of that loop right there. And I want to show you real quick a good way to tidy up your loops if you've got some extra space on there. So I'm just going to scooch in a little bit here. scooch in a little bit here. And I'm going to take my chain nose pliers. I'm going to put the end of one of my chain nose pliers here on the top of the wire, right at the bottom of that loop. And then on the other one, and just very gently give it a little squeeze. Turn it around, give it a little squeeze there. And that's going to tighten up that loop, make it look a little less loose and crazy. And then I can also tighten this up a little bit here by very gently holding this. I'm not squeezing it. Do not squeeze it. Hold on to your loop and just twist in the direction of the loop with those pliers, and that'll tighten that up too. So you can fix your loops even if they're not perfect the first time you wrap them. Just snip off my excess wire here. So that's the first loop that I made, and I just wanted to take that time to demonstrate how to fix a loop that isn't perfect. And this isn't completely perfect right now. I'm super okay with that, but it's a little bit closer. Alright, so then I'm going to push the beads up here against this loop that I made. And I'm going to measure 3 fingers down from the end to snip my wire. I'm going to do the same thing with my butterfly. We'll get to the second loop in a minute. And I'd like to maybe demonstrate a little bit on this one how you can get an even amount of wraps on both sides. So let me show you how to do that. I'm going to start this one very much the same way I did the first, by bending back and then pushing the wire around the top of my pliers, rotating my pliers and going all the way around. But on this one, instead of doing multiple wraps, I'm just going to wrap once, like that. Just once. Push my bead up, give myself my 3 fingers. Alright, now for this one, to get your wraps even on both sides, I'm going to take my chain nose pliers and hold on to my wire, and I've scooched up about 1/3 of the way up this barrel to give myself some extra room for all of the wraps, because I'm going to need room down here and I'm going to need room up here on all of those. So I'm going to do a little bend, just twisting this so that it bends the same way. If the circle disappears, then I know it's right. Bend that over. It does not need to be at a right angle. And then put my round nose pliers on top, go around the top, rotate it, and all the way around. And I'm going to do 2 wraps on that end. Do you remember I did 1 wrap here? Then I'm going to flip this around and do, I've got 1 already, I'm going to do, and this is a little bit trickier, so I'm going to grab a second set of pliers for this. So we're going to go 2, and then 3. So now I've got 3 wraps on this side, but there's still going to be room on the other side to do a 3rd wrap. So let's go around another time on that side. And it looks like 3 on each side was exactly right. I'm going to tuck this a little bit. But that is one way that you can make sure that your wraps are even on both sides, is to just do the same amount of wraps on each side, but just start with 1, and then 2, and then 3, and whatever you do to one side, do to the other. And I want to make sure that these are parallel. They are not parallel. So I'm just going to twist that. There we go. And snip my excess wire for my wrapped loop links. So that is one extra little tip and trick to get an even amount of wraps on each side of your bead. I don't always do that. In fact, it's not something I regularly do, but if asymmetry bothers you and you need it to be symmetrical, this is absolutely the best way to do it. So we've got that one done. Let me do my second wrap on this one. See, I already did the first wrap, so I can't do that same 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3 that I did on that one. But I am going to hold on to it a little bit closer to the pointy end. Make my little bend. Do my wrap around. And I still get 3 wraps on this end, the same as I got on this end. So if you're familiar with how much space the gauge of wire that you're using takes up, it's pretty easy to make sure you leave that space when you do that in order to get an even amount of wraps on each end of your wire. But that comes with time and practice. And one thing about wrapped loops is they get better the more you practice them. So hopefully those little tips will help when you are practicing your wrapped loops. All right, so that's all of the basic wrapped loop links made for this design. Now let's do our extra embellished wrapped loop links. And for this one, I'm actually going to be pulling the about 5 inches of wire. I was just straightening that out. I'm going to go ahead and cut that off because it's going to be a lot easier for me to work with if it's not on that spool. Sometimes when you're doing fancy stuff, you gotta take the spool out of the equation. All right, so for this one, I'm gonna do a wrapped loop on one end, just like I did with the first ones. And I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this all the way with about 3 wraps. 1, 2, 3, like that. I'm going to go ahead and snip this one and put my fire polish bead on here. Then I'm going to start another loop on the other end. So we're basically doing this. We just have a lot of wire here on the end of it. It's basically going to be the same type of loop as we've got here. Just I've got extra wire going, so after I make this loop, that's when we add our extra stuff to it. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3 wraps, and see there's a little bit of space here. I wanted that because I am going to be curving this around and attaching it here to this other side. But first, I am going to pick up an 8/0, a dagger, an 8/0, a dagger, an 8/0, a dagger, and one more 8/0. So a total of 4 8/0 seed beads and 3 daggers. I'll let those scooch on down here. And if you noticed, before I started, I had already begun a bit of a curve on that wire. And that's just to make it easier for it to go ahead and curve around my design. I'm holding on to the beads, one bead finger here, one finger here, holding these in place while I pull this wire. And in that little divot between the bead and that wrap, I'm just going to wrap this in here. Push using your thumb around to keep it tight. And one more time. Snip off my excess wire here. And there's a little bit of wire sticking out straight there. So I'm going to use my pliers to tuck that sucker in. Keep it flush with the rest of those loops. And now I have an extra embellished wrapped link that is going to hang down in the design. So let me show you in the strand that I already linked together how that's going to work. Like that. So let me get these guys connected. I'm going to put this up here for reference so that I don't accidentally connect the wrong links for this other side. I would like this to be a symmetrical design. So we're going to want these guys in roughly the same place in this design, going up this way. So we're putting these together, and then after it has been put together, we will make our focal and get all of this together with a closure and everything. So let me grab my two pliers that I'm going to be using to open and close jump rings. Sometimes daggers can be really challenging to create with, so it's fun to come up with something like this, that kind of a little out of the box, but a really fun way to play with them, to get something that you might not expect to happen. There's one way that I've used daggers in the past that some of you have seen in some of the things that I've created, where I take a large bead like that, and with beading wire I'll go through it around and just have the daggers hanging underneath that with some seed beads. And I have done that before on this channel. So this is kind of my wire wrapping take on that, instead of using beading wire for that, using some craft wire. And it is copper craft wire that I'm using for that. So we're just putting these guys together, making sure the ends match up. We close those. And once these are together, then we can make our focal and put everything together. But isn't this pretty? It's kind of arboreal. I like, you know, with the aqua and the green. It's really pretty, like a sunny day in a grassy meadow, or sun-dappled forest with leaves and beautiful butterflies. But this is a really fun way to dress up a little bit of your beads, just by adding a little extra bling along one side. Jazz it up. Flare. 21 pieces of flare on this necklace, I swear. Mandatory flare. Just a little bit more. Just a little bit more. And you know, there are enough beads left in the bead subscription for basically all of these except for the butterflies. I'm using all the butterflies in the necklace, but you could 100% do a bracelet to go with this too, with some of these, just with these links. I think that would be a fun little bracelet to do. I'm not doing it in this tutorial though, because we are just going this way. So I've got both ends, both sides of my necklace chain made. Let's go ahead and set these out of the way and get out the beads that I'm going to use for the focal. All right, now, before I started, I double checked that these fire polish beads would be able to fit 2 strands of 22 gauge wire without forcing it. See how it moves freely without forcing it through? So it's essential to this particular focal design. I'm going to pull off about 5 inches of wire. And let's do about 1/3 of the way. I'm just going to start a little bit of a curve right here. Doesn't need to be a big curve, just a little curve. That should do. About like that. And I'm going to pick up the same bead pattern that I did on my embellished link with the 8/0 dagger 8/0, and it's going to be the same amount of daggers and 8/0s. So that is 4 daggers, or 4 8/0s and 3 daggers. I'm just going to let them drop here into this little bent portion. Bend this up a little bit. Put the short end through my bead and then bring the long end around and through the bead in the opposite direction. This is a little bit bent. All right. You may have to grab hold and pull a lot in order to get these through. You can use pliers to hold on to it. I'm just using my fingers so that I can make sure that they are nice and straight. So now that I've got that, I'm going to bend this end up around the top in that direction, and I'm going to bend this end up right past it. And where they meet in the middle of this, I'm going to take my pliers, and on the long part, I'm just going to do a little bend up towards the top. And then we can take the short end and wrap it around here a couple of times. 1, 2, 3. Like that. Give that a snip. I'm going to place my butterfly right on the top. Right there. And then make myself a little loop on top of the butterfly. Another wrapped loop. Let's go that way. I'm going to make kind of a larger loop, so instead of going about 1/3 of the way down the barrel, I'm going to go 2/3 of the way down the barrel. There we go. Because I'm going to be attaching 2 different strands to this loop. So with all of this in the way, it does get a little tricky with wrapping this. I'm going to go ahead and grab that second set of pliers. Can get a little hard to do that when you've got fingers in the way. but a little bit easier with pliers. Okay, in the back. Let's make sure that's nice and straight. And there's our little focal. Okay. Now it is time to finish this up. Let's get out our jump rings. And we'll use one jump ring to attach this end. Make sure those ends come together. Okay. And another jump ring for the other end. There you go. I was just trying to make sure that my links are facing the right direction, since one of my links does have a distinct top and bottom to it. How pretty is that? I love it. Absolutely love it. Let's get a clasp on here. This is a lobster clasp. I'm gonna put it on that end. And I'm just going to add a jump ring here onto this one, just to give it a little extra something to hook onto, so I'm not just trying to hook directly onto the loop there. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, those loops were overlapping. I just had to do a little wiggle to get them to meet in the middle. And now we have a necklace. How cool is that? So let me demonstrate the earrings that I'm making. It's a very similar construction to my focal here, but instead of the butterfly, I'm just using one of these bead links like this. So let's get these guys out here. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to move this one out of the way so that we are not. I'm just going to put it on because it's beautiful and I love it. Just real gorgeous. I'll show you how I do my ear wires too after we make this earring. Alright, so to make the earring, I'm going to scooch in a little bit more because we weren't super close during that last make. Oh, you know what? We're going to need 2 more of these for that part. Alright, so I've got my daggers, I've got my 10mm fire polish, I've got my pearls, and I've got my 8 seed beads. I'm going to take my 5 to 5.5 inches of 22 gauge wire, snip that off. About 1/3 of the way down, give myself a little bit of a bend. Does not need to be a deep bend, just a little bend. And then 8/0, dagger, 8/0, dagger. Keep repeating that until you have 3 daggers and 4 8/0s on the wire. Let it settle down here in that bend. Put your fire polish bead on the short end of the wire, and then bend that long end of the wire around gently, because you don't want kinks, because then it won't go through this. And feed that through that end, the other end of that bead, so that they crisscross through there. I'm feeding it through, and now I'm going to start pulling. Now that that's through, bend over the top with the short end, bend over the top with the long end, and where they meet in the middle right there, I'm going to take my pliers, bend that one straight up, and then use my finger to wrap this short end around the long end just a couple of times. Like that. Give that a snip. Tighten it up. And now I'm going to put on an 8/0, the pearl, and an 8/0 right there. I'm going to do another little loop right here on the top. So grab my round nose pliers. I'm holding on to this right above there, and I'm just going to leave the back end against the bead while this is open slightly. Tip the front end up here and then squeeze. And then bring that around, move that out of the way, and wrap, wrap, wrap. Right, once that's in the back, give that a smoosh to work harden it. There we go. So now we're going to need some ear wires. Let me show you how I make those. To make ear wires, I'm going to use this for mostly work hardening it and for at least one bend, but for the most part I am going to be using some 6-step bail making pliers. I'm also going to be using these flush cutters, and I've got a metal file for filing the end of my ear wires to keep them from tearing up ears. I use 22 gauge wire because 20 gauge is just a little too thick for my ears and they kind of hurt. So I'm going to get about 2.5 to 3 inches of wire, give that a snip, and do that twice. I'm going to make sure that the ends of my wire are cut flush, like that. And then I'm going to use the smallest step on my 6-step bell making pliers to make a little loop on both of these. Bring it around until it meets the wire on that end. I'm not going to be centering this loop. I want it to be offset to one side. And I'm just holding my wires together, and I want this to be kind of looking away or facing away from the part that I'm going to be wrapping around. For these ear wires, I'm going to be using the second largest loop. So let's face it away from them towards the largest loop. Hold on to both. You don't need to squeeze real hard when you do this, just hold them so they don't fall out. And then wrap around here. It does not need to meet these loops. It just needs to come around there like that. You can have it meet if you'd like, but it doesn't need to. I'm going to hold onto the wire on this end of that curve right next to where my loops are, and then push with my finger to make a little bit of a bend. Again, this does not need to be a 90-degree angle, just a shallow bend like that, and then snip off about 1/2 centimeter away from that bend with a flush cut. Just because it's flush does not mean that it is not jagged, and that is why after I work harden it, I'm going to be filing it with the metal file. To work harden this, you can either use a wire whacker, a hammer and bench block, or my favorite way, give it a smush with your pliers. Just put it in there, squeeze, and it gives it a little bit of a work hardening on there. I do that on all the parts that have bends. If you do have trouble squeezing or squeezing hard, absolutely do recommend the bench block method of wire hardening or a wire whacker, because then you can take out all of your aggression and get your wires going the right way when you do that. So to get the end smooth, it's a little bit rough when I feel it, so I'm going to take the wire, and you don't need to saw at this, you don't need to put a lot of pressure on it, just drag it across there. Just drag it across gently. Feel it in between, and when it no longer feels rough and it's been smoothed out, you can also use a burr cup for this if you have one. I don't have a burr cup, but I do have these, and they're very useful for this. So you notice I'm holding it here and not down here, so it's not going to bend my ear wire while I'm working on it. And I do wait to do this part until I work hardened it, because it might have another way of getting out there. So now I can add my ear wires to my earrings. Swinging open that loop, putting that on there. And let me grab my necklace for one last look at our project. Zoom back out. I will put a link in the description to Potomac Beads if you're interested in subscribing. You do get a pretty great selection of check glass beads, some 2-hole beads. Sometimes you get some tools and stringing material as well. But this was part of my beaded chain challenge that I am doing at least 2 beaded chain necklaces every week for the month of September. And this is necklace number 7. I hope you're enjoying that challenge and learning a little bit more about doing some beaded chains. Hopefully this was helpful and maybe gives you a little bit of inspiration on something fun you can do with your daggers if you don't know what to do with them. This is a really fun way to play with them. Until next time, my friends, happy beading.